Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon when you are watching this webinar. My name is Dave Nagel, and I'm really excited to have a chance to work with some of the teachers and leaders in Lake Zurich schools here in the next month and then throughout the next part of the school year. This specific webinar is sort of a pre-planning webinar. We're sort of looking at how in our profession, we are always busy. There's never a time when we're not, and a chance to sort of flip some of the professional learning. And so having a chance to work together with the large district leadership team on Wednesday, June 8th for a few hours, we're going to dive in and kind of prepare for the work we're going to do in August around feedback and clarity. And so this is kind of an overview of some of those points. To be honest, some things I will probably go through, and I'm not going to use the word cover, but I will address certainly again, but certainly it would give us a chance to be thinking ahead of time as we come in to the work on June 8th, which is actually a pre-session, and then certainly for the work when we're together August 2nd. A little bit about me. My background has been specifically as a practitioner in secondary education. That's where I did my teaching and my administrating. Actually, that's off. I was a 5-year administrator. Worked 13 years in a very large district, actually one of the largest in Indiana. So I understand from a secondary perspective the comprehensive nature of middle and high schools. Now in my work as a presenter, which I've been doing now for over 12 years, I have a lot of opportunity to work with elementary schools. So I'm fortunate that I get to see the gamut of teachers and leaders coming from different perspectives. I'm also humbled that I've had a chance twice to be certified in John Hattie's visible learning work. And that's only because my previous experience as a presenter before Corwin was at the Leadership and Learning Center. You might be familiar with Doug Reeves and his work. That's where visible learning first came to the United States, and then the contract didn't continue on when the Leadership and Learning Center sort of broke off and went their own separate ways and went back to Corwin. So fortunately, I was able twice to go through that process. And then during that time, I was able to have my first book published. And even though the title is around grading and secondary, it's really about formative assessment. And even though it says secondary, the ideas and concepts are extremely applicable to all levels. I think most of us know, and I'm pointing the finger at myself sometimes as a secondary person, we don't read things unless we think they're geared towards us. But either way, I just wanted to give a little bit about my background. And then throughout this webinar, at the bottom of the slides, I'll have times where I have my Twitter handle or my email. Please reach out. You do not have to go through Terry or Jody or anyone during our time and process of working together. But you might have a question. You might have a challenge of something that I say that you don't agree with, or you want more information. The door is always open. And I want to just encourage that dialogue more than anything around any concepts or ideas we're talking about, whether it's support, feedback, or as I said, to challenge some of the things we're talking about, or challenge me to go deeper with examples for how it relates to you and your role in Lake Zurich. So I'm going to jump right in. And a lot of us are familiar with Dylan William and Black's work back in the late 90s inside the Black Box, looking at the power of effective feedback. And certainly Helen Timperley and John Hattie's work, effective feedback can double the speed of learning. And I think anytime, whether our students are proficient or they're struggling, I think we would sign up for that. I think a key point we need to look at is effective doesn't necessarily mean positive or negative. Effective means it helped me learn and grow. The one thing we can always remember is that feedback, to be effective, must meet the Goldilocks principle. It's just right for me. It's just right for me in the moment where it can do the most good. And Hattie talks about providing dollops of feedback that the learners can use. Sometimes we can provide tons of feedback. And the problem is then we can't use or reply or know how to work or deal with the feedback we've been given. Excuse me. And I think we could think of times professionally or personally where that's happened. But I want to kind of challenge the teachers and the administrators watching right now. We give our students or our teachers great feedback, don't we? Maybe we even thought this. I wrote great feedback on their paper and they didn't use it. My question to all of us is, we might give it, but what do they hear? And I want to challenge the teachers to say, do you give effective feedback to your students that increases their learning? The answer choices are yes, no, or not really sure because I've never asked them. To the administrators watching, do your teachers receive effective feedback that helps them grow in their craft and develop? It's either yes, no, or not really sure because I haven't asked them. And so I'm going to challenge all of us, including Dave, on this call and on this webinar. I need to receive feedback from you. I can think that my idea or example was a good one, but until I ask and find out from you, I'll never really know. I'm going to ask you to take a moment, and in your working handout, you have a simple, short set of 7 statements. And what you reflect on these 7 statements related to feedback that resonates the most with you. And I'll kind of leave these up on the screen. I'm going to pause briefly. You're going to need to pause the recording a little bit longer and either reflect individually on the place there at the bottom of the statement, or if you're working or watching this in a group, it's a great chance to pause the recording and have a discussion. So I'm going to pause briefly, but which one of these 7 resonates the most with you? We're going to come back to the same activity when we're together on Wednesday or June the 8th, but I want you to have a chance to look through just these 7 that I pulled. So take a moment, pause the recording, have a reflection. I'll continue in just a moment and assume you paused it as long as you need. Welcome back. As always, during any of our webinars, I will assume you've paused the recording as long as needed, and then I'll bring us back together. And then if you need to pause longer, please do so. And again, we will go back to that activity. And so hopefully if you've got thoughts or ideas around that, we'll have a chance to do a larger debrief when we're together June 8th. But the purpose of feedback is to do one thing, is to close whatever gap exists. And if that's the gap, first thing students or learners have to know is, where should I be? Where are my learning intentions, success criteria? What am I expected? Where am I at right now? If I'm trying to get to a destination in the morning and we're driving somewhere and I'm not there, I need to know how many exits away or how many stoplights away or how far away I am. I need to know my current position. And then feedback is what helps close that gap, whatever that gap is, to go to that next level, whatever thing we're trying to work for. And the model, which a lot of us might be familiar with, that Hattie has put together, has 3 elements that are instructional, and I'm going to come back to self-feedback in a moment. But the 3 elements for the instructional feedback model are task, process, and self-regulation. We use task feedback when the learner is new or emergent, and it's often related to correct or incorrect information. Students are getting their order of operations incorrect, if they're messing up phenotype and genotype, if they're missing the difference between how to do one of the steps in stoichiometry between grams to moles or moles to liters, or they're just missing that part up, we have to intervene. And often that's helping them with something that's correct or incorrect. Once there's a certain degree of proficiency, we don't want to give the students the correct or incorrect answer because we want them to process where they're at. So you've gotten phenotype or genotype right here. Why are you messing it up when we go to the Punnett squares? Notice what I asked was a question. The last time you've charted your paper, you've got the vertical and x-axis correct. What's wrong now? What's wrong this time? I want the learner to begin to process, and so I'm going to begin to ask questions. And finally, self-regulation feedback is when there's a high degree of proficiency. Imagine you have a student in your class that's a fairly proficient reader, and you give them a very challenging text, and you say, now listen, here's a challenging text. I want you to think about what pre-reading strategies you should use, what works best for you. Notice what I did. I didn't say, here's a challenging text, here's the 3 pre-reading strategies you should use. I asked the learner, what works best for you? All right, you're about to go into the batter's box against a pitcher that throws a lot of curveballs. What should you be thinking about? Now, if I've got an athlete who is barely able to make contact with the ball, I'm not going to be giving that type of feedback. I'm going to be telling him or her. Self-feedback or praise, we'll come back to in a minute, really isn't involved in the instructional model. It's about the learner themselves saying, you need to try harder, you need to do this. Great job. That would be praise. That would be self-feedback, and that's not going to be involved in our instructional model. So I'm going to take us to a real life situation. Those of you, I have 3 young children, 11, 6, and 4, so I'm nowhere near this stage, but I dread the day when I have to teach any of my boys how to drive. But imagine you've had this happen where you've had to teach your children how to drive. They're pulling out into traffic and they don't look both ways. We're going to stop. You need to look both ways every time. It's not personal, but it's about something that was done incorrectly. In this example, it's good to know that they know that the left pedal does stop the car. That's good. What else should you be thinking about if you're on icy roads? Not, it's icy roads, you need to slow down. I could do that. But I want that learner to start thinking, what should you have been thinking about? What should you have been considering before you had to go to that step, before you had to slam on the brakes and cause the car to stop quickly? What should you think about next time? Again, in the form of a question. We're about to go into heavy traffic. Haven't done this in a while. What should you be thinking about? Before we go into this traffic here, what are some things you should consider? Again, I'm not going to take them out into the interstate when there's heavy traffic if I don't think they're near proficiency. But I want them to start maybe being able on their own to go, you know what, I probably should turn the radio down or maybe even off. Probably should readjust my mirrors. I should really get 10 and 2, really start thinking about what I'm doing because this is going to be a new challenge for me. That won't tell Nick much of anything in terms of how he's developing his skills for driving. And I think we can take this simple example and it resonates with us. So when we talk about this instructional model for feedback, it's applicable in life as much as it is in school. I'll leave these four up here just for a moment. I won't read them as deeply, but you can see the same type of idea in a classroom where we're talking about vertical axes. I want to go down to the one on self-regulation. Students that we're asking to support other students. It's not that we want to tell them, help Joe find the answer. What errors should you look for? A great way to challenge our more proficient students is to help them better diagnose what someone else's learning gap would be before they try to fill it. Back to the point about praise. One thing that we need to realize is that praise is ineffective feedback for the product or their performance. We don't want to praise the product. We don't want to praise their performance. We want to praise their effort. We want to praise their resilience. The product had a scale. The product had a bar that it wasn't going to change no matter who they were. And a challenge for us, an interesting study from DeLuke and Summer found that industrialized countries like ourselves, we often prefer praise. And think about it. You go to anyone's Facebook page, we like when people like our stuff. We'll put our coffee cup out there and say, I'm about to have a cappuccino, and we'll wait for everyone to like it. Then 10 minutes later, we'll take another picture of it half drink so more people will like it again. In Confucian-based cultures, more often than not, they actually are offended by praise. They want to know about their work. They know where they're at. They're more inclined to desire specific feedback about the work and not about the praise. Wouldn't that, at least not on a stereotypic level, but when we think culturally, why sometimes Asian students outperform our students? Again, not that an American student can't want to deny praise, or just because they're of Oriental descent of some kind that they're by default not going to desire praise. But as a whole, our culture does prefer this. And so this is a challenge for teachers. It's a challenge for administrators. Teachers like to be told when things are going really well, and that's okay. But we need to say that was going well because we have a standard, we have an expectation. The feedback is efficacious. So it's not praise about the person. It's praising the effort that they got to or why their work met a certain standard. And also when we think about feedback, we have to think of a feedback loop. We have to think about feedback from the student to the teacher, from the teacher to the administrator, and so on and so forth. We have to have that culture in place so that way the feedback has a chance to be effective, which means it has to be a safe environment. Safe environment to make mistakes, a safe environment in some classrooms for students to have all the right answers and then still be challenged to go deeper. The next and final piece I wanted to address today briefly was the importance of teacher clarity, because without clarity, we can't provide feedback. The only way I can give you effective feedback is if I've been upfront as to why you were going to get the feedback, what the goal was, what the target was. And so just having a little bit of a joke here with a cartoon, the reason why we want to share with students specifically what the success criteria was is not only will it help us provide them feedback, but allow students to get feedback from two other places. Students can receive feedback from three places in the classroom: from the teacher, from their peers, but also from themselves. And the more they can monitor their learning with success criteria, the more they can use that feedback to fill that gap. So where am I going? How am I going? Where to next? Where that feedback could come from a variety of places, but the sooner we can help it come from them, the better they're going to be owning and understanding their own learning. Some essential components of clarity: learning intentions, the relevancy, the examples of modeling, success criteria, and then how we check for understanding. I'm going to take us through those 2 points there around learning intentions and success criteria in a moment, and what the difference is between the two. But we need to make sure our students or our teachers can answer these 4 questions. What am I learning? Why am I learning it? Not it's going to be on the test, but I'm learning to do this graphic organizer to separate my ideas from my concepts, from my figurative language to what was embedded in the text, what was implicit in the text. That's why I'm learning to use this graphic organizer. Because eventually I want to get to that product. How will I know that I've learned it? What essay am I going to provide? What's going to be on my lab? What's going to be in my response to text with a constructive response? But we also have to separate how will I learn it, that process piece. Because the graphic organizer, the practice, that's the process. The number of times I'm in the batting cage and working on my swing, that's the process. The product is what happens when I get to the game. The product what happens when I turn in my project or I take my final test. But how I'm learning it around those processes really relate back to the success criteria. I'm going to share with you some data from a neighboring district. This was a middle school. And basically what they did was ask students a simple question every time they came in the classroom. What are you learning? And how will you know that you've learned it? And on the left-hand side, those were the students that initially described what they were learning. What you see next to the date were the number of students that the administrators asked students in that question. What you see on the far right was the compliance-based answer. When we asked students, what are you learning? How do you know when you've learned it? They looked up at the board and read almost verbatim. We're learning how the Pythagorean theorem will align with triangles. And the point is, it was compliance-based. That middle column, that was where the students were very authentic in describing what they were doing and how they would learn it. A key element as well, as you see the different color scheme in terms of where there was an increase or decrease. The other thing the administrators found was when they were on an ongoing basis embedding this professional learning with their teachers at their staff meetings, at their PLC meetings, at their early releases, teachers coming together, often of like disciplines, and sharing success criteria and how they were working, the more they did that, the more they saw an increase in the classroom. So from an administrative standpoint, we have to be very careful at monitoring professional learning impact based on the exit tickets at the end of the session. We only monitor it there. They might like the slides or they might like the brownies, but it doesn't mean it's going to change practice. We need to monitor professional learning initiatives based on, do they change classroom actions of the adults, and are they having the right kind of impact we would expect on the students? Success criteria then, which we're going to get into now, must be concrete, measurable, observable, and to some degree open to negotiation. It's this last piece I'm going to walk us through here. So I'm going to give you a learning intention and take just a moment, pause the recording. What if I were to ask you to identify the role of costume and makeup in the movie Star Wars? And take just a moment and jot down some ideas on your handout. Take a moment, pause the recording, identify the role of costume and makeup in the movie Star Wars, and you can fill in any of the 7 movies with that question. Okay, welcome back. I'm assuming you took the time to pause the recording and fill in that spot on your working handout. Now I'm going to ask you to think differently and respond now to part 2 of that question. What is the role of costume and makeup in Star Wars? And be able to give an example where the costume developed an aspect of the character, where makeup was used for a specific effect, and then make sure you can justify those examples with an explanation. I think it's safe to say most of you, if not all of you, if you've seen Star Wars, and if you haven't, that leads to the point about it being a biased question, we're able to, with much more clarity, not only determine what I was looking for, be able to monitor where your learning is. And you might give me a costume and a makeup example, but you really didn't justify them. Or give me a really great costume example and justify it well, but you didn't leave me a makeup example. How quicker can I provide you feedback? How sooner could a peer provide you feedback? And as a footnote, when I was doing this specific activity with some administrators in Columbus, Ohio, one of the responses was around Jack Nicholson and what he did in The Joker with his makeup. And someone said, well, you're way off base. We're talking about Star Wars. Think about what can happen. We can get so caught up in our learning intention that we get caught up in the context of Star Wars that our learning intention is really the role of costume and makeup in films. And it's not about Star Wars. That's the context through which I'm trying to use. And so now our success criteria allows me as a teacher or an adult to not get caught up in To Kill a Mockingbird, to not get caught up in that one example that I used in my social studies or science or other subject matter lab, but to realize it was around making sure that they understood how those things took place in movies. And the example and the justification is what the student should be monitoring, not too much around the context. Certainly, they're going to use the context, but the context was only a means to get to that learning intention, and the success criteria truly has a chance to bring it to life. Here's just a couple examples that can be posted in the classroom, more of an elementary nature. My learning goal or my learning intention is that we can write a recount of something that happened, and boom, we see the success criteria. Posted on the wall, students can monitor it. They can give each other peer feedback. Same thing with a math example, how we solve percents. That means that we can fill in the blank there with those examples. And again, as simple as this is, the power in this is critical. Most importantly, for us to be able to provide feedback, for that student to monitor their own learning. And then finally, as we bring students into this process at all levels, but even more so at the elementary level, there's 2 kinds of success criteria. There's closed skills, often correct or incorrect, usually quantitative, very easy for students to start to measure themselves against. And here's an example, math example, to understand and explain. Oh, I'm sorry, this is an open skill example. Oh, my slides were off. Apologize for that. I'm going to jump to this one here. So the closed skill example. Closed skills are neither right or wrong. Success criteria for closed skills are things we can measure. So learning intention was to quantify into a ratio. Here's my success criteria. I can fill in the blank. We can count those. We can monitor those. We can closely keep track of those. It's a closed skill. An open skill is they're neither right or wrong. There's usually more than one answer. There's a qualitative measure. This is where we have to help students come into that equation, into that discussion. And here's an example of an open skill. I apologize for those last two slides being out of order. But open skills, neither right or wrong. And again, I brought in a music example, but I can create a balanced section, use tone, pitch, and dynamics, use instruments creatively. What was the strongest textual evidence we used? Again, those are the kind of things where students need a little bit more help early on, but we need a balance of both the closed and the open skills in terms of how we help them develop an understanding of the success criteria. So early on, closed skills might be an easier place for us to go with them. Again, I do apologize for that last little glitch in those slides being off, but hopefully this was a nice overview. Provide some questions. You had a little chance to jot some ideas down in your working document. And I'm really looking forward to hopefully having some communication with any and all of you prior to June 8th, but certainly look forward to that session on Wednesday, June the 8th. Thanks so much. Have a great rest of your day.